All right, good morning, everyone. Can you guys all hear me? Can you hear me? That's good? Okay. So if we're going to go ahead and get started, I'm going to open us with some prayer, so we just finish our conversation. Okay. Dear Lord, I thank you that we could gather here together this morning to hear and reflect on your word, and I pray that you would bless our times together, Lord, and pray that we would have a good week this week. Amen. All right. So does anyone remember what all has happened so far? It could give a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what we've covered, like who the main characters are and what's happened to them thus far.
Ruth and Boaz.
Yep, Ruth and Boaz. Okay. So when we just left off, do you remember what's happened?
She's gone down and laid beside him, uncovered his feet,
Mm-hmm.
he woke up, granted her a blessing.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So she went to Boaz at night, and he woke up, and she's asked to marry him. And so at the end of our last chapter, she went back to Naomi, bringing the barley that Boaz had given her. And then Naomi says, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." So we see we've gone through the whole harvest season, and now this is the climax of the book. It's going on to the next day. So time slowed down, and we see what's going on. This is all happening the next day. And so, verse 4, now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. So if you remember last week, Ruth went to Boaz and asked him to redeem the land because they had sold their land prior to going to Moab during the famine, and they need someone to buy the rights to the land back for them. And when she had asked Boaz to do this, he said, "There's one redeemer who's closer than I am." So someone who is more closely related to Elimelech, Naomi's late husband, who has the right to buy back the land for the family. And so he's going to approach this man now. And we see he goes to the gate of the city, and that's because the gate is the primary place. It's sort of like the center of town, the place where the people mainly gather, where business and legal transactions take place. So we see here, it's also noteworthy that he says, "Turn aside, friend," because the author intentionally doesn't tell us the name of the Redeemer, which is an interesting point, as we'll see. And then he says, and then he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. So he's summoned the Redeemer, the closer one, and then he has 10 people here, and these are legal witnesses that he's summoning here, so we can see that a transaction is about to take place. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." So we see here he's initially interested in redeeming the land, but when he hears Boaz say that he will also need to marry Naomi or marry Ruth, he suddenly changes his mind. And this is an interesting point. So the way that the redemption worked is they had to sell the land when they left. They were probably broke because it was a famine and they needed the money. But because there was a famine going on, they probably had to sell the land for cheap. And how the redemption worked is that you would buy back the land at the price that it was sold for. So he's probably thinking that he's going to get a good deal redeeming this land for a low price. And then Naomi, as the heir of Elimelech, as his widow, she's the one who has the right to seek a relative to redeem this land. And because Ruth was married outside of Israel, she's still considered a foreigner because she wasn't living as an Israelite in the land, and so she is not able to seek the redemption herself. But by having a marriage to Boaz in Israel, that would make her an Israelite, and therefore her child would be able to be an heir to this land. So the Redeemer's probably thinking, since Naomi has no living heir, that he's going to have access to buy this land. And we remember the land is based on the clan, so each family's divvied up a portion of the land. If Naomi's line dies off, then if he redeems this land, it will end up going to his family after she dies. And so he's going to buy this land for cheap. He thinks it's going to go back to him. But now he realizes that if Ruth is part of this deal and he's providing an heir for her, the heir that comes from Ruth will be able to carry on Naomi's family line and then keep that land. And so his family's not going to get the rights to this land if the heir comes through her. And then he's probably worried that having another son would also, because that son has the rights both to the late father, who he becomes a legal heir of Mahlon, Ruth's husband, but also he would become an heir of the biological father as well. So this would also divvy up his estate with a new son. And he's probably also not interested in marrying a Moabite woman because, as we talked about, they're people who don't have a good reputation in Israel. And then this is also an interesting parallel to the earlier part of the story, where Naomi has two daughters-in-law. One stays with her, and then one doesn't. And now we see Naomi also has two relatives, Boaz and this other redeemer, where one is willing to take care of her and redeem the land and marry Ruth, and the other one is not. And so, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself," he drew off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders of the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day." As part of the transaction, one person would take off his shoe and give it to the other person. That was just a tradition of how they would do transactions at that time. It was just a little weird. You see, I've got a painting here. This is a Dutch painting, and so he's got like a little wooden clog. I'm almost certain that that's not what the shoes actually would have looked like. But it's just an interesting thing that he gives the shoe as a way to say that you have the right of redemption now. So we also see Boaz is taking Ruth to be his wife. And so we see that he's caring for the covenant promise to Naomi's families that they have this land, that every tribe has this portion of land. So if you remember a few weeks ago, when we were doing the David story, we talked about Naboth's vineyard, where King Ahab went and offered to buy this land from Naboth. And he said, "I can't do that because this is the covenant that's been promised to my family is this land." And so we see here that Boaz also is caring for God's covenant to his people, that he's promised this land to this family, and he wants to make sure that this family doesn't die out and they still have access to this land. And then there's also sort of a resurrection imagery here, in that this line, which looked like it was going to die out, God has now provided a way to have this line continue. And so points I have here, Luke 7 is the story of the widow of Nain, where there's a widow whose only son has died, and then Jesus resurrects him, and so now she has her son to take care of her again. So I think this is an interesting point of showing how God takes special care of widows who in that society were the lowest of the low and often had no way to care for themselves. And then we also see he's recognizing again that Ruth is a Moabite woman that he's taking into his family, which shows that God cares for all the nations, not just Israel, and that Ruth is being incorporated into God's family, even though that she's not part of Israel by blood. And so another gospel connection I had is from Matthew 15. There's a story of the Canaanite woman where Jesus withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon, and behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." But he did not answer her a word, and his disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she is crying out after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But she came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." And he answered, "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table." Then Jesus answered her, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." And her daughter was healed instantly. So we see here that she also is a foreigner. This is a Canaanite woman, and she's identifying Jesus as the son of David. So even though she's not a person of Israel, she recognizes that he is someone who's of the line of David, who is a descendant of Ruth. So we see here this continuous God provides for the Moabite woman Ruth by incorporating her into God's family. And this woman too, even though the disciples say we shouldn't help her, she's a foreign woman, Jesus is still providing for her, and she's also recognizing in faith who Jesus truly is. So throughout the Bible, we see God is caring for the people who are outside of the family of God and is bringing them in. And then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman." So we see that they're comparing Ruth to the biblical figures Rachel, Leah, and Tamar. Do you guys think, why might they be making this connection between her and these other women? So we remember Rachel and Leah are the wives of Jacob, and they bear the sons to him that become the 12 tribes of Israel. And then now they're connecting her to Ruth. So I think that they're showing that she also, like the wives of the patriarchs, they become matriarchs of Israel. She too is becoming a matriarch of the Davidic line. And then I have here for Tamar in the story in Genesis 38, they record her story. Judah is one of the 12 tribes, and we know that it's told to Judah that he will become the head of the tribes of Israel. And he has 3 sons. The first one dies, and then, as we've talked about, there was a duty for the brother-in-law to take the wife to provide an heir. And so the first brother dies, and she marries the second brother, and the second brother doesn't want to provide her an heir, so God kills him too. And then Judah says he'll provide the third brother to her when he grows up so that she can have an heir, someone who will continue the line and also be able to take care of her when she gets older. But as he gets older, she realizes that he's not interested in actually giving the son to her. He's probably afraid that the son is going to die like the other 2 brothers did. And so she pretends to be a prostitute and then sleeps with him, and then she has twin sons through that. And so Judah ultimately, like unknowingly, provides an heir to Tamar, even though he didn't want to. And so we see another parallel in that Judah did not want to provide an heir for Tamar, even though he ended up doing so, and she had to trick him, whereas Boaz willingly provides the heir for Ruth and provides someone who will continue the line and take care of her in her old age. And so we see a lot with these biblical figures that we see their sins depicted in the biblical stories, but Boaz is someone who, even when he's compared to these other figures, we see he's always depicted in a positive light, and that he's done the right thing throughout this story. Mm-hmm.
Isn't it interesting these people say that? May you be like, Rachel and Leah, may you be like Tamar, and they really have no idea what they're really saying, right? I mean, Ruth in a lot of ways is better than Rachel and Leah. I mean, she gets to eventually, from her line comes King David, and then eventually the Christ himself. I mean, she's better. And then Tamar too, right? Tamar gets an heir, but really Ruth is maybe even greater, right? And I think there's a theme throughout the scriptures. People often say things, they don't always even know what they're saying, right? I think of Holy Week, when I think it's Caiaphas says, it would be better that one man should die than the whole nation. And he's exactly right, but he doesn't really mean what he's saying. And I kind of wonder if that's here too, if they're going to look back one day and say, wow, Ruth is even greater than we thought.
I think there's also this theme throughout the Bible, is like as it continues going, we keep seeing greater fulfillment. So we see at the beginning in Genesis, when God promises to the woman, your seed will crush the head of the serpent. And then we see this continuous theme of these women who are barren end up bearing sons. So like Sarah, and then Rachel, and then Ruth too. I mean, she was married before and was probably married for a while and hadn't had an heir yet. But now through Boaz, God is providing an heir. And then we see at the end of the story, the virgin conceives and bears, the one who's the most unable to conceive. The virgin is the one who becomes pregnant and bears a son who will be the fulfillment of the promise. So, he's an older guy, so it's likely that he had a family already. I would guess that either that he is already married and he would be taking her on as a second wife, because polygamy, although God doesn't sanction it, was practiced at the time, and she wouldn't have had another way to take care of her, to be provided for, since it was needed for them to have a male provider. Or it could be that he's a widower. So I think those are probably the two most likely options. Yeah, I think it's most, especially because he's, someone who's big, like, has a big reputation in the community, is wealthy. I think it's pretty likely he already has other children, either because he's married already or he's widowed. But it doesn't say that, but that's probably the most likely case. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. I think this is an interesting phrase, that the Lord gave to her conception. So we see God is the one who is providing the heir here. And then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, have given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. And so we see here, the story starts to focus again on Naomi, who is really the main character at the beginning, and she's the one who's getting focused on at this point. So we see that God is working here to reverse Naomi's fortunes. So at the start of the story, she'd lost her family, and then she comes back, and the women say, "Is this Naomi?" And she says, "Don't call me Naomi, for I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." But now we see, instead of gossiping about her, "Is this Naomi?" the women are now singing praises to her. And when she's gone away, she's come back empty, but now the Lord has filled her again by providing this child for her. And so even though she's not the biological grandmother of this child, that she's been taken as a caregiver for this child and will become a grandmother figure for him, and that this child, now we see the women are referring to the child here as the Redeemer, and he's the one who will take care of Naomi in her old age. And then the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." They named him Obed. So now we see the women of the town are actually the ones who are providing the name for the child, which is interesting because typically in the Bible, the mother is the one who names the child. But we see here that the people of the town are naming him. And they names him Obed, which Obed in Hebrew means servant. So why might you think that this might be a fitting name for Obed? Who is he serving? Yeah. Yeah. So through him, so he's a servant because he's taking care of Naomi and Ruth, but also because through him, God will provide an heir for the house of Israel. David will be king, and then ultimately the Messiah will come through him. So he's serving his family, but also serving God. And then the last bit here is the genealogy, which a lot of times we can skip over them, but I think there's a lot of important stuff here in this genealogy. So now these are the generations of Perez. So as we said earlier, Perez is the son of Judah through Tamar, who we talked about earlier. And through him, the line of Judah is established, and Judah is the one that will rule over Israel. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. And so we see here that there are 10 generations listed here, which this is a typical formula for a biblical genealogy, having 10 generations. So we see in Genesis, the way the genealogies are structured is we have 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and then the story of Noah happens. Then after that, 10 from Noah to Abraham. And so we see here 10 generations from Perez, the son of Judah, to David, who would be the king of Israel. And it's also notable that typically the 7th and 10th generations are considered places of honor. So we see here in Jude, it's when he refers to Enoch, he says Enoch is the 7th from Adam, because he's the 7th in that table of generations from Adam to Noah. And we know about him is that he's one who walked with God and God took him away. So he's presented as an honorable and important figure in that genealogy. And so we see here Boaz holds position 7, and so he's being honored here in this genealogy. And then we see at the end, of course, David, who will be the king of Israel. And then also we see the genealogy also repeated in the Gospels. So in Matthew 1, we have Salmon fathered Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. So we see here, it's interesting that earlier in this chapter we had a redeemer who is not named, and therefore we don't remember his name or who he was, whereas Boaz, who stood up and did the right thing and cared for these women, his name is remembered in this place of honor in the genealogy and in the Gospels when he's included in the line of Jesus. And the same with Ruth, who's one of the few women in Matthew's genealogy who's mentioned, that even though she's a foreigner, she's been brought into the Davidic line and the line of the Messiah, and then she's remembered in the Gospels. And so we see there's also several other notable biblical figures in this genealogy. So like you said, Judah was the one who was promised by Jacob that the scepter shall not depart from him because he is the one from whom the Messiah will come. And then in position 5, we have Nahshon. He is referred to in 1 Chronicles as a prince of the sons of Judah. He's a figure in the book of Numbers. Whenever leaders of the tribes are gathered, he's the one who's a leader among the tribe of Judah. And then we see here also Rahab is mentioned in Matthew's genealogy as the wife of Salmon, who is the father of Boaz, and she's the one from Joshua who provides for the spies who come into Jericho when they are conquering Jericho. She provides for them. And then she also was a foreigner and was a prostitute, so a woman, who was not of high esteem. She is also incorporated into the line of David and the line of the Messiah. And then we see also mention of Jesse, who is the father of David, and he's a figure who oftentimes titles of the Messiah will be things like the shoot from the stump of Jesse in Isaiah 11, and also Jesus is called the root of Jesse. So he's a descendant of Jesse's line, so he's a branch of Jesse, but also because he's God, he's the one who's the roots of this family tree as well, because he's the creator. And then I had here from O Come, Emmanuel, which is our classic Advent hymn that we sang a verse of this morning. O come, thou branch of Jesse's tree, which is another title for Christ, that he's the one who comes from the line of Jesse. And so we see here too that, in this book, we see we've got, in the Bible, we've got the first 5 books, which are the books of Moses. And then we have the book of Joshua, which describes them coming into the promised land. And then after that, we have a period of judges. And this is a period when the tribes are in Israel, but they have no king. And then right after that, we have the book of Ruth here, which opens by saying it was during the days when the judges ruled. So during this time, Israel is in its tribal period. They don't have any centralized leader. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, which is what the Bible says. And then immediately after that, we have this book, Ruth, which describes how even amid this time of trouble in Israel, God is working through this line to provide an heir, to bless Israel with the King David. And then ultimately, he'll bless all the nations as from David comes Jesus. Did anyone else have any thoughts or questions about what we've covered so far? Yeah, go ahead.
Are there any other seven, this is my recent notes, any other 7, 10 genealogy spots that you or we are aware of in terms of that place of honor? You listed a couple with Enoch.
Yeah, so the question was about, in the genealogies, I noted how the 7th and 10th places are places of honor, and if there are any other examples. So in Genesis, we have the 2 main sections of 10 with Adam and Noah, and in that one, like I said, it was Enoch and then Noah at the end, and then after that, it's from Noah to Abraham. And in that genealogy, the 10th one is Abraham, so he has the position of honor, and the 7th is named Eber, and there's not a lot of information about him, but he must be someone who's important because the word Hebrew comes from his name. So E-B-E-R, so it's like H-E-B-R-E. So it's sort of, that's where the word comes from, even though they don't sound super close in English. So he must be someone who's important because when they say, Abram the Hebrew, they're talking about him. So he's in the position of honor there. And then in the New Testament genealogies, we see in Matthew that it's in a series of 14 generations. I'm pulling that up right now. And so it's 14 from Abraham to David, and then 14 from David to the Babylonian exile, and then 14 from the Babylonian exile to Christ. So I don't know, because he's using a series of 14 rather than 10, I don't know if there's anything in terms of specific places in that one that would be. But he's also using the cycle of 14 as a way to demonstrate Christ through the lens of the history of Israel. Yeah.
So today, we start Advent, and you and I talked a little bit outside class that Ruth is kind of a great book to get us into Advent. Can you share a little bit about that? How is Ruth maybe a good Advent text?
Well, with Advent, we see, Advent means coming. So it's talking about the coming of Christ. And so we see in the Old Testament, they're waiting the first coming of Christ, which happens in the Gospels. And now that that's happened, we also are waiting for the coming of Christ. And so we see the history of the Old Testament is very, very long. And so we see this is towards the beginning. This is before even the kingdom has been established in Israel. but we see that through this family, God is bringing forth the king and is bringing Christ. And so, especially with Naomi, she starts off in a very lowly position, and we see that God has provided for her throughout this story. And it's the same with Israel. They, went from slavery into Egypt, and then now they're brought, and God is providing for them, and he'll provide a king for them, but ultimately he'll provide the Messiah. And they may not, at any given point in their history, they may not realize when they're in the mid of slavery or in the wilderness or in exile that God will still provide for them, but he is, even though they may not see it. And so, Ruth is a lowly foreign woman, and we would never guess that she would ultimately become the matriarch of the Messianic line, but she does. And so we see, too, in our own lives as we wait for the coming of Christ. We may not always see that it's coming, from our observation of the world, but we know that God is at work to be faithful to his promises, even when we may not see that in our own experience.
You use that word lowly, and I think that the angel visiting Mary, and that's kind of where Mary uses, right? You come even to me, this lowly person. And it's interesting, we keep moving to Jesus, and rightly so. But Ruth, I assume, would also point us to Mary, right? The Lord uses these barren women throughout the Bible. Unlikely people. Who could ever have a kid from a barren woman? And yet Abraham has a kid, Hannah has a kid, Ruth has a kid. Yep.
So unless there are any other closing thoughts or questions, we could close. Anyone have any final thoughts? All right, then I'll go ahead and close this in prayer. Dear Lord, I thank you for this time we have together when we can sit here and read and learn from your word. I pray that you would help us to remember what we hear in Bible study and in the preaching and worship this morning, and that you would bless us this week, and that we would remember you, and during this time of Advent, remember that Christ is coming soon. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.